G'day guys, it's Paul from Polyman Astro, and in today's video we're going to look at a relatively new script called Generalised Hyperbolic Stretch. This video is essentially split into two parts. In the first part I'm going to show you how to install the script into PixInsight fairly quickly and easily, and in the second part I'm going to compare the script to both histogram transformation and curves transformation. There is another video in production at the moment where I'm going to channel my inner atom block and show you in detail how I zeroed in on the settings that seem to be working for me. And then you could do the same with the script if you'd like to. But this video is just going to be a general overview, hopefully fairly quick, so that at the end of it you can decide, is this a tool that you'd like to use in your workflow? So let's jump over to the computer and I'll show you how to install it. Okay, so I first heard about this tool on Astrobin. In the forums section, someone posted a fairly interesting to me heading, Alternative Image Stretching for Mathematically Bent PixInsight Users. And that sums me up perfectly. And the author was David Payne. And what he did, he came up with some pixel math expressions to generalize the histogram transformation tool and the curves transformation tool, what they're actually doing in the background. But because it was pixel math, it was quite cumbersome to use, and you didn't really get decent feedback until you'd actually created the image, and it was very hard to kind of dial in the appropriate settings for you. So David asked for help in this forum post from someone that knew how to create scripts in PixInsight, and thankfully someone came along and did exactly that. And they created a script and they put it on this GitHub page. Now I'll put the link to the forum post and this GitHub page in the description below so that you can find them, because it is an interesting read, but also it'll be nice and quick to get to this generalized hyperbolic stretch. So let's get to part one of the video anyway, which is how do we actually install this. So from this GitHub page we can choose either the source code zip or the source code tar.gz, and that's going to depend, are you using Windows or Linux really, or Mac. I'm on Windows, so I chose the source code.zip, and when I click on that it'll download and go into my downloads folder. So I'll go there now, downloads, and here's the zip file here. I've already had the zip file and I've already unzipped it, so you just extract it as you would any zip file. And what you need to do once you've got that folder is you need to copy it to your PixInsight source scripts folder. Exactly where that's going to be is different depending on whether you're in Windows, Mac or Linux. I'll show you where it is for Windows. It's on my C drive. Again, that's going to depend where you've installed PixInsight. For me, it's on my C drive under Program Files, PixInsight Source Scripts. Now, the PixInsight source scripts will be the same for all of us. Once you're in your PixInsight folder, it'll be easy to find source.scripts. In that discussion, there is some steps for Mac users, and it'll be pretty similar for Linux users as well. So again, I do recommend you look at that forum post so that you can follow through and put it in the right spot. So you can see it's here for me, GHS 1.0 under PixInsight source scripts. Let's jump across to PixInsight now, and I'll show you how to install it. Alright, so we're inside PixInsight. All I need to do is go to the script, feature scripts, and then down the bottom here, click on add. And I again need to go to that appropriate PixInsight source scripts folder, which is going to be dependent on your operating system. So you'll need to know where that PixInsight source scripts folder is. And here it is, GHS 1.0. And what I would do is click on select folder. Here it'll show up as one additional script for you. And then you would click on OK and done. And it's installed for you. Now, I'm not 100% when I did this whether I had to close PixInsight and then reopen it. So if it doesn't now show up in your script utilities submenu here as Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch, you might need to close PixInsight and then reopen it for it to finish that installation. Okay, but that's where it will be. Once you've done that, it'll be under Script, Utilities, Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch. Alright, so now that we've installed the script into PixInsight, let's move on to part 2 of the video where we'll actually use the tool and compare it to both histogram transformation and curves transformation. And for me, definitely at this point already, I'm fairly confident that this tool is going to replace histogram transformation for me in my workflow. So let's jump into PixInsight and have a look. So in PixInsight, I've already set up an image of the Tarantula Nebula that I've taken. Now the image is a bit soft. I think the atmosphere was a bit dodgy at the time and it was quite low on the horizon, so it's not going to win any awards. But the reason I've chosen this image is because of the huge dynamic range within this image. The middle of the Tarantula Nebula, as we're going to see, is extremely bright. So it's going to be a good test of this new tool, I think, and we'll find out. So let's jump in and work with this image. What I'm going to do first is make a duplicate, and I'm going to call this one on the left histogram transformation, HT, and the one on the right I'm going to call GHS. GHS. There we go. And I'm going to open up histogram transformation now. And I've made a video in the past on how to use this tool nice and quickly, but I'm going to work with my HT image and I'm going to track it, and all I'm going to do is just do a series of smaller stretches on this image to brighten it up. And what I tend to want to do is get my image to about the peak of the histogram here to be about the 25% mark. So in the left third of the image, and you'll notice when I'm stretching with this tool, I can see my histogram at the top here move towards the right, and that straight line curves. That's going to be important when we start using this other tool, this idea of curving things. And curves transformation looks similar, we can stretch the same way. So there we go, I've done a really rough histogram transformation stretch on this image. The final thing I might do is just bring this black point in. I'm going to clip it to 0.0001. Okay. The reason I'm doing that is it'll make a nice comparison how I'm going to do things in GHS. It keeps things nice and consistent. I'll be able to clip the black point to exactly the same point for both images. So there we go. We've got our histogram transformation image, and as I said, this is a super high dynamic range region. We have completely blown out the middle of the tarantula, the wonders of the 183 sensor, but we've got some really nice gas in the background. It looks fairly decent. If I used the HDR transformation tool here, I could probably bring back the center of this, and we might do that a bit later. So now what I want to do is use the GHS tool, which again is under Scripts, Utilities, Generalised Hyperbolic Stretch. And here it is here. There's a lot of information here, and I'll go through some of it today, but obviously, like I said, I'll go through much more detail in the second video. The first thing we need to do whenever we open this tool is choose a target view, the image we actually want to work on, which for me is GHS. You see it snaps to the top left. You've got no choice there, that's where it's going to end up. Okay. This window here is exactly like the windows in the histogram tool, where I'll be able to see what my stretch looks like and where my histogram is going to end up. All our stretching tools are down here, the little sliders down here. This first slider, the stretch factor, is just like pulling the midtone slider in the histogram tool. It curves that red line and it starts dragging that histogram off the left hand edge. So if I pop it at about the 25% mark there, so I've just pulled that slider until it's at the 25% mark there, we'll be able to look at what this is going to look like. So I can always get a preview by clicking on this button here. Unfortunately, it's not a live preview. You only have two choices. At the bottom left here is a radio button called Show Target Image. That's what the image looks like now. If I click on the Preview Stretch button, that's what the stretch will look like after I've finished. And at the moment that's terrible. It's just like the STF. It's blown out the highlights and most of the stars. So not quite what we want. And that's where this second section comes in, the local stretch intensity. And what it does is it controls where the stretch is happening. and the author recommends this to be somewhere between 8 and 10. I found 8's a perfectly acceptable spot. I'll go through in more detail in the second video exactly what it does, but the author recommends 8. That's what I use, and it works quite well. Okay. The other thing that we can do is we can control where the stretch is going to happen. At the moment, most of the stretch is happening down here in the blacks, and very little stretching is happening up here. That's why it's pretty much flat up the top here. Not much stretching is happening there. But most of it's happening at 0, and that's going to drag up the noise floor as well as everything else. What we want to do is maximize precisely where the stretch happens. And you tend to want that to happen about where this histogram starts lifting up towards the peak. So somewhere in this section here would be a great spot, and I'll show you in detail in the next video how to find that spot. But for this image, I know that it's about 0.0003 where I want that symmetry point to be. The other thing that I want to be able to do is even further control those highlights at the end there, and that's what this highlight protection does. I found a good spot for me is about 0.8, and it just further flattens this curve at the end here and protects the highlights even more. And then the final thing, and always the final thing, once we've made the adjustments to these other parameters, we can move this slider backwards and forwards to zero in where we actually want the peak of the histogram to be. And like I said, I want it to be about 25% there. So that's a good spot for me. I'm going to click the tick button here, and that's going to do my stretch, and I can see it over here on the left. Then I can adjust the black point, just like in the histogram tool, and to do that I need to change this stretch type here from Generalised Hyperbolic Stretch to Linear Pre-Stretch, and you'll see it turns off the ability to change all these buttons because I don't need them anymore. The only thing I can adjust is my black point on my clipping proportion. And on my histogram stretch, remember I said I wanted that 0001, and that's so that in this tool I can get exactly the same clipping proportions so that they're pretty much like for like then. So I can click the tick button there, and that's my pre-stretching now done. So I'm going to close this Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch, and you'll see it comes up with a warning. Do you want to save your log file? It gives you the option to save what you did as a text file. At the moment, all you can do is open that and then re-input those values into the tool. It's not terribly useful at this point, but I'm hoping in a future update by clicking yes here that when you open up the tool in the future you'll be able to import those settings and just click the tick button, and you know it's going to do the same thing every time and speed up the process. So here I'm just going to click no. So here are my two images side by side, and you'll see that this tool has much better protected those highlights so they haven't been blown out. My stars aren't as bloated. There is nice contrast between true sky background and some of the fainter nebulosity, but the noise hasn't been blown out as it has in the histogram tool. And I could probably even further show you that, demonstrate that. If I put them over the top of each other and then just toggle between them, you'll see the highlights at the center of the nebula are much better controlled. I can still see all that dark dust in the background and some of that fainter nebulosity, but the noise hasn't been dragged up quite as much. And again, if I zoom in, I can show you what that looks like, maybe over in this corner over here, and make the same window here. Not as dramatic, but you can see that the noise, I think, in the GHS image is better controlled than in the other image, and the stars are definitely not quite as blown up. We can further adjust that contrast in a moment. So there's the side-by-side using the histogram transformation tool. So what I'll do now is I won't even worry about the histogram transformation. We know that's blown out. I'll work on just this GHS image. Again, I'll make a duplicate of this image, and I'll call, actually I'll put them the other way around. I'll put the clone over here, and you'll see why in a second. Keep the GHS tool there, and this one I'm going to call curves, because this is where I'm going to do some curves work using the curves transformation tool, and this is where I'm going to work on using the GHS tool. So I've already roughly created a kind of curve here, but I'll reset it and I'll show you how you might work with this tool. So what I want to do, if I can, is kind of accentuate this section here and make it a bit darker if I can. So I can see running over the tool here, I can see that that's happening kind of in this region here. And I want to accentuate it against this kind of dust region here, if I can, this fainter dust here. So maybe in this section here. But what I don't want to do is blow out my true, bring up my true sky background too much. So maybe I'll protect that down here. So now what I can do is zoom in a little bit to that region where I've got those two pieces and just pull them up and down a little bit. So drag the dark section I want down just a touch, drag the light section up just a touch. And there's a kind of really basic quick curve that I can apply to this contrast boosting curve. And I found it by going over my image. Okay, and if I do a before and after, it's subtle, but it's done a little bit to accentuate this region down here, which is what I wanted it to do. Okay, now I could do the same thing with my curves, my GHS tool as well, and I'll show you that now. Before I open up that tool though, let's do the same thing that we did with curves. What I want to kind of do is accentuate again this region here. So I'm looking at the K value down the bottom of the screen that'll show up down here. I'm looking at that K value and seeing that that's at about somewhere around the 0.28, the 0.29 region, so I'll need to remember that. And I know my true sky background here is at about 0.0, let's say it's at about 0.06, 0.065 maybe even, is my true sky background there. And this was, what did we say? It was about 0.28-ish. So let's open up our script again, Generalized Hyperbolic Script, and again choose GHS, which snaps over here. So now I want that symmetry point to be at 0.28. And I want my shadows now to be at 0.065, I think we said. So that's basically where I want things, and I'm going to do a fairly minimal stretch this time. 2 is probably a good start for your local stretch intensity here. And then I'm just going to adjust the stretch till that curve starts lifting up. Basically like what we did with our curves tool, but I can really nice and accurately refine exactly how much I want this stretch to happen. So if I preview what this looks like now, there's the before, there's the after. It's quite subtle, so maybe we could do even more to this image. Maybe we could boost this up to say 0.4 and see what that does. Still quite subtle, but it is brightening up the brighter parts, which is what we want. Could probably even go a bit higher. That might be too extreme now. Yeah, that's too extreme. So you can very accurately play with these numbers to get a nice sense of where things might be working for you. Still too bright, 0.5 is too bright, so let's bring that down. What were we at before? 0.4 I think we went to. That's better. So it's nicely accentuating that central region, but we're blowing out the core again, so I might bring this down quite significantly this time, just to protect those highlights a little bit more. So we're brightening up the image around the 0.28 region, which is in here, which is what we want, but we're not blowing out those highlights now, which is again what we want. So let's okay that one. And now we can compare the GHS to our curves. So there's the curves, there's the GHS tool. So to me, I think the GHS tool is really leaping out of the page here. And again, you could take much more time to refine where you want things. But my end goal, I knew, was that I wanted to accentuate this kind of region from some of this slightly more bright gas, but I didn't want to blow out the core, so I could control that, and I didn't want to drag up the noise floor too much either. And I could just play very accurately with the settings and produce a nice looking curves result. So there we go, there was our introduction to how to install this new script, and then a nice comparison with the histogram transformation tool and the curves transformation tool. And I mean, to me it looks like a much more versatile and much more precise tool for replacing histogram transformation and curves transformation. I'll definitely be using it in my workflow more and more, and I'm forever further refining that second step, how I can really zero in on where I want contrast to be boosted and how I want to boost it. And hopefully you've seen that this tool might be useful for you as well. You might have discovered that no, actually I prefer histogram transformation and curves transformation, and that's fine too. But hopefully you learnt something from looking at this new tool. As I said, there will be a second video where I'm going to go much more into detail how I came about some of those settings that I've used and how I zero in on them. So keep a lookout for that. But thanks for watching.